You'll be gone before you spend that $2,740,000, Mom. You might as well just put it in my name. The words hit me like ice water on a summer day. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to tell these stories. My name is Evelyn Clark. I'm 76 years old, and I live in a converted basement in Chicago. Not by choice, but because my daughter Rachel convinced me it was the best option for everyone involved. The basement smells like damp concrete and forgotten dreams. The single window sits at ground level, offering me a view of ankles and dog paws passing by on the sidewalk above. This morning started like every other morning for the past 2 years. I woke up on my narrow cot at 5:30 a.m., my arthritic knees screaming their daily protest as I struggled to stand. The plastic dresser Rachel bought me from a discount store creaks when I open it, a sound that somehow manages to echo through the thin ceiling above, usually followed by her husband Mark's irritated footsteps and his muttered complaints about noise downstairs. I dressed in the same 3 outfits I rotate through. Simple cardigans and comfortable pants that Rachel approved of because they don't draw attention. My wedding ring, worn thin after 52 years of marriage to a man who loved me until cancer took him, catches on the synthetic fabric. It's the only jewelry I have left. Rachel convinced me to sell the rest for practical reasons. The kitchen upstairs is where I spend most of my days now. Not cooking. Mark made it clear that my cooking is too bland for their tastes, but cleaning, organizing, staying useful enough to justify my presence. The marble countertops that I helped pay for gleam under the recessed lighting that I also helped fund. In a kitchen that serves food I'm never invited to help prepare. Rachel was running late this morning, rushing around in her designer suit, the kind that costs more than I used to spend on groceries in 3 months. Her coffee maker, an expensive Italian machine that she'd asked me to contribute toward last Christmas, hissed and gurgled as it prepared her daily double espresso. "Mom, can you handle the kids' lunches today? I have back-to-back meetings." She didn't look at me as she spoke, her fingers dancing across her phone screen with the practiced efficiency of someone who values digital connections over human ones. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, the endearment feeling strange in my mouth. When had I stopped meaning it? When had it become just another word I said to keep the peace? I watched her gather her things. The Coach bag I'd bought her for her birthday, the keys to the BMW I'd helped finance, the confidence that came from never having to worry about money because someone else always took care of it. At 42, Rachel moved through the world with the assurance of someone who'd never doubted that she deserved everything she had, never questioned where it came from, never wondered about the cost to others. Oh, and Mom? She paused at the kitchen island, finally looking at me directly. Her eyes, once bright with childhood wonder when I'd read her bedtime stories, now held the calculating coolness of someone solving a problem. "We need to talk about your situation. My situation." That's what she called my life now. "What about it, dear?" She sighed, the kind of exaggerated exhale that suggested my very existence was exhausting. "Mark and I have been discussing it, and we think it's time you considered letting us handle your finances more. Officially." The coffee maker finished its cycle with a final mechanical wheeze. Steam rose from her cup, creating a barrier between us that felt symbolic of something larger, something I was only beginning to understand. "I manage my finances just fine, Rachel." "Do you, though?" She moved closer, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used with difficult clients at her law firm. "Mom, you're 76. You're living in our basement. You can't drive anymore. You can barely manage the stairs some days." Each word was precisely chosen, designed to reinforce my helplessness, my dependence, my gradual irrelevance. This was Rachel the lawyer, building her case, presenting evidence of my inadequacy with the same methodical precision she used to demolish opposing arguments in court. "I'm managing perfectly well," I said quietly, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true. Was I managing? Or was I simply surviving day by day in this space between being wanted and being tolerated? Rachel walked to the window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline where she built her career, made her reputation, created the life she felt she deserved. You have almost $3 million sitting in accounts, Mom. Just sitting there. And for what? You'll be gone before you spend that money. You might as well just put it in my name. There it was. The sentence that would replay in my mind for hours, days, weeks to come. Delivered with such casual certainty, such matter-of-fact cruelty, that it took my breath away. You'll be gone. Not when you're ready, not if something happens, not even someday. You'll be gone. Present tense. Inevitable. Soon. As if my death was not just expected but convenient. As if the only value I held was in the numbers on my bank statements. And once those were transferred, I could disappear entirely without causing anyone any real inconvenience. I stood there in her kitchen, surrounded by appliances I'd helped purchase, on floors I'd helped pay for, under lights that burned with electricity funded by my money, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been bruised and battered for so long it had developed scar tissue. This was something deeper, more fundamental. My sense of self, my belief that I mattered, my faith that the love I'd given freely for 76 years had created some reservoir of affection that I could draw from when I needed it most. I'll think about it, I heard myself say, though I wasn't sure where the words came from. Rachel smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd given me in months. But it wasn't the smile of a daughter grateful for her mother's consideration. It was the smile of someone who'd just won a negotiation, who'd successfully maneuvered a difficult client toward the desired outcome. Good. That's all I'm asking, Mom. Just think about it. She gathered her things and left for work, the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd helped refinish, the door closing behind her with the finality of someone who believed the matter was settled. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee machine, and wondered when I'd become so transparent that my own daughter could see right through me to the money that waited beyond. After Rachel left that morning, I found myself sitting on the basement steps, holding a photograph I'd discovered while organizing old boxes. It was from Rachel's 8th birthday party, back when we lived in the cramped apartment on Milwaukee Avenue, before the scholarships, before the law degree, before she learned to measure love in dollar amounts. In the photo, Rachel's face is smeared with chocolate frosting, her gap-toothed grin so wide it seems to take up half her face. I'm behind her, my hands on her shoulders, wearing a dress I'd sewn myself from fabric remnants. We're standing in front of a cake I'd baked at 4 a.m. before my shift at the diner, decorated with 8 candles that cost more than I could afford, but somehow seemed essential for her happiness. I remembered that day with perfect clarity. How I'd worked a double shift the night before to earn enough for her present, a set of colored pencils she'd been wanting for months. How I'd spent my lunch break at 3 different stores to find the exact shade of pink frosting she'd requested. How I'd smiled through my exhaustion because her joy made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. But what struck me now, staring at that faded photograph, was something I'd never noticed before. In the background, partially hidden behind our small celebration, was a pile of unpaid bills stacked on our kitchen counter. Electric company notices, rent warnings, medical bills from her bout with pneumonia the previous winter. I'd been 29 then, barely scraping by as a single mother after David left us for his secretary. Rachel was too young to understand why Daddy didn't live with us anymore, too innocent to grasp that his monthly support checks arrived sporadically, if at all. She just knew that sometimes we ate cereal for dinner, and that Mom cried quietly while doing dishes. The memories flooded back with overwhelming intensity. How I'd sold my grandmother's wedding ring to pay for Rachel's school supplies. How I'd worn the same winter coat for 8 years, patching the holes with fabric glue because a new one meant choosing between warmth and her piano lessons. How I'd told her we were playing the quiet game when the electricity was shut off, turning our powerless apartment into an adventure rather than an emergency. I climbed down to my room and pulled out another box, this one filled with report cards and school certificates. Every A+ was a triumph we'd celebrated together. Every academic achievement represented hours I'd spent at the kitchen table, helping with homework despite my own exhaustion, reading the same math problems over and over until they made sense to both of us. Rachel had been brilliant even then. Her teachers constantly praised her intelligence, her determination, her bright future. "She's going places," they'd say, and I'd beam with pride, knowing that every sacrifice was building something beautiful, something lasting. When she was 12, Rachel needed a computer for school. They weren't common in households like ours back then. This was 1992, and personal computers cost thousands of dollars we simply didn't have. But Rachel's teacher had mentioned that the students without computers were falling behind, struggling to complete assignments that required typing and research. I took a second job cleaning offices downtown, working from midnight to 6 a.m. after my regular shift at the diner. For 4 months, I barely slept. I'd come home as Rachel was getting ready for school, help her with breakfast, catch 2 hours of sleep before my afternoon shift, then head back out to scrub floors and empty trash cans while the rest of Chicago slept. The day I brought home that computer, a bulky desktop model that filled half our kitchen table, Rachel threw her arms around me with such fierce gratitude that I cried right there in our doorway. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "I know how hard you worked for this." She did know then. She understood the cost of things, the weight of sacrifice, the connection between my exhaustion and her opportunities. When did that understanding disappear? When did my efforts become expectations, my gifts become entitlements? High school brought new challenges, new expenses. Rachel wanted to attend St. Catherine's Academy, a private school known for sending students to elite colleges. The tuition was more than my annual salary, but Rachel had earned a partial scholarship based on her grades and test scores. I just needed to cover the remaining $8,000. I refinanced our small apartment, took out loans, picked up every extra shift available. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and dinner so Rachel could have proper meals. I wore shoes until the soles separated from the uppers, then duct taped them together for another few months of use. But it was worth it when Rachel graduated valedictorian, when she received that full scholarship to Northwestern University, when she stood on stage in her cap and gown and thanked me in her speech for believing in my dreams. The audience applauded, and I cried tears of pure joy. Every sacrifice had led to this moment. Every sleepless night, every double shift, every meal I'd skipped. It all made sense when I saw my daughter accepting recognition for her achievements. College brought different pressures. Rachel needed appropriate clothes for internships, money for textbooks that cost hundreds of dollars each semester, funds for the networking events and professional development opportunities that would set her apart from other students. She called every few weeks with urgent requests. "Mom, there's this amazing conference in New York, but I need $500 for registration and travel." Or, "The other students all have laptops now, and I'm falling behind trying to use the computer lab." I said yes to everything. I borrowed against my retirement savings, took cash advances on credit cards, sold whatever possessions held any value. My wedding dress, the china set my mother had given me, the small collection of books I'd accumulated over the years, anything that could be converted to cash for Rachel's education. She graduated summa cum laude and was immediately accepted to law school at University of Chicago. More tuition, more books, more networking events. The costs kept climbing, but so did her achievements. Dean's List every semester, law review, internships at prestigious firms. When she graduated law school and landed her first job at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's top corporate law firms, I felt such overwhelming pride. My sacrifices had created this brilliant, successful, accomplished woman. Rachel was everything I'd dreamed she could become. She moved into a downtown apartment, started building her career, began dating Mark, a fellow lawyer from a well-connected family who owned a successful real estate development company. When they announced their engagement, Rachel asked me to help with wedding costs. "Just the basics, Mom. I know you don't have much, but every little bit helps." The little bit she had in mind was $30,000, my entire retirement fund. I withdrew it without hesitation. This was my daughter's wedding, her chance to start married life properly, surrounded by the kind of people who could advance her career and secure her future. The reception was beautiful. Elegant venue, gourmet food, designer flowers. Rachel looked radiant in her $1,000 dress, surrounded by colleagues and clients who spoke admiringly of her potential. But during the father-daughter dance, a moment when tradition called for her father to be present, Rachel danced alone for the first 30 seconds before Mark's father stepped in. David had been invited but didn't attend. too busy with his new life to witness our daughter's triumph. I watched from my table in the back, wearing a dress I'd bought at a consignment shop, and realized that despite funding much of this celebration, I felt like a spectator at someone else's life. After the wedding, the requests continued. Rachel and Mark needed help with their first house down payment. "It's an investment, Mom. The property values in this neighborhood are skyrocketing. You'd basically be investing in our future." $25,000 from the sale of my own small house, the home where I'd raised Rachel, where we'd shared countless meals and conversations and quiet moments of contentment. Then came the grandchildren, Emma and James, and with them, new expenses. Private schools, tutoring, enrichment programs. "We want to give them every advantage, Mom. You understand how important education is." I did understand. I'd lived that understanding for decades, prioritizing Rachel's opportunities over my own comfort, her future over my present needs. So I contributed to college funds, paid for summer camps, bought birthday and Christmas gifts that demonstrated my love through their monetary value. Each sacrifice felt natural, necessary, born from a love so deep it required no calculation of cost versus benefit. This was what mothers did. They gave everything they had so their children could have more than they'd had themselves. But somewhere along the way, my giving had stopped feeling like love and started feeling like obligation. Rachel's gratitude had evolved into expectation, her appreciation into assumption. The daughter who once hugged me for buying her a computer now discussed my financial contributions with the detached professionalism she used for client consultations. Was I used? The question whispered itself in my mind as I sat surrounded by photographs and memories in my basement room. Had 47 years of sacrifice been an investment in a relationship, or simply an extended transaction where I paid for the privilege of being needed? The first time I truly felt invisible in my daughter's house was on my 75th birthday. I woke up that morning with the quiet anticipation that had carried me through decades of birthdays, not expecting grand celebrations, but hoping for acknowledgement, for the simple recognition that this day marked another year of my existence. I dressed carefully in my best cardigan, the navy blue one with pearl buttons that Rachel had complimented once 3 years ago. I even applied a touch of lipstick, something I rarely bothered with anymore since my social circle had shrunk to the 4 walls of this basement. Upstairs, the kitchen hummed with its usual morning efficiency. Mark stood at the granite island, scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee from his favorite mug, the one I'd given him last Father's Day with "World's Greatest Dad" printed in gold letters. Emma and James sat at the breakfast bar, focused on their iPads, the silence broken only by the soft tapping of their fingers against screens. Rachel emerged from her home office, already dressed for court in a sharp black suit, her hair pulled into the severe bun she wore for important cases. She moved through the kitchen like a general reviewing troops, checking that everyone had what they needed before beginning their day. "Emma, don't forget your violin lesson after school. James, your soccer cleats are in the mudroom." She grabbed her coffee, her briefcase, her keys, orchestrating the family's departure with military precision. I waited by the counter, my hands folded, my smile ready. Surely someone would remember. Surely the day that brought me into this world, that began the chain of events leading to Rachel's very existence, would warrant some acknowledgement. "Have a good day, Mom," Rachel called over her shoulder as she headed toward the garage. "The cleaning lady comes at 10, so try to stay out of her way." The door closed behind them with finality. The house fell silent, except for the hum of expensive appliances and the distant sound of their cars pulling out of the driveway. I stood alone in the kitchen for 20 minutes, listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway mark each passing moment. At exactly 10 a.m., the cleaning service arrived. 3 efficient women who moved through the house with practiced speed, their presence making me feel even more unnecessary. I retreated to my basement room and stayed there until they finished, not wanting to be another obstacle for them to work around. No one called, no one texted, no cards arrived in the mail. By evening, when the family returned and resumed their routines without any mention of the date, I understood with crushing clarity that my birthday had become just another Tuesday in their lives. The woman who had given birth to Rachel, who had sacrificed everything to build the foundation for this comfortable existence, had been forgotten as completely as last week's grocery list. That night, I bought myself a small cupcake from the gas station down the street and ate it alone in my room, the single candle I'd found in the kitchen drawer casting strange shadows on the concrete walls. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered to myself, tasting salt in the frosting from tears I hadn't realized I was crying. The microaggressions began to accumulate like paper cuts, individually small, collectively devastating. There was the family photo session in November. Rachel hired a professional photographer to capture their holiday card image. I watched from the basement window as they arranged themselves on the front porch. Rachel and Mark in the center, the children flanking them, everyone dressed in coordinated outfits of cream and burgundy. "Should I come up?" I called from the basement door. "Oh, Mom, we're just doing a quick family shot," Rachel replied without looking at me. "The light is perfect right now, and we don't want to lose it." I wasn't family, apparently. I was something else. A permanent houseguest, a dependent, a responsibility to be managed rather than a person to be included. The photographer took dozens of shots. I could hear their laughter, their gentle coaching of the children, the satisfied murmur when they captured the perfect image. Later that evening, I saw Rachel reviewing the photos on her laptop, selecting the ones that would represent their family to friends and colleagues. I existed in the same house, breathed the same air, contributed to their mortgage payments and daily expenses, but I had been edited out of their story as cleanly as if I'd never existed at all. Christmas morning brought another lesson in invisibility. The living room overflowed with carefully wrapped presents, each one bearing elegant gift tags written in Rachel's perfect penmanship. The children tore through their packages with the enthusiastic greed of kids who had never wanted for anything, surrounded by piles of toys and clothes and electronics. Rachel and Mark exchanged substantial gifts, a designer watch for him, diamond earrings for her, while I sat in the corner chair with my single present, a generic gift card to Target, purchased at the last minute and presented without ceremony. "We thought you could get yourself something practical," Rachel explained when she noticed my confusion at the impersonal gift. "You know what you need better than we do. What I needed was to feel valued, remembered, loved for something beyond my financial contributions." But practical gifts didn't address those deeper hungers, and I suspected Rachel knew that. The children didn't have presents for me. When I was their age, I would have spent weeks making gifts for my grandmother. Hand-drawn pictures, painted rocks, crooked pottery from school art class. My love had been expressed through effort, through the time and attention that said, "You matter enough for me to create something just for you." Emma and James had been given no such opportunity. Their relationship with me had been carefully managed to require nothing from them. No emotional investment, no consideration of my feelings, no recognition that I might have wants and needs beyond basic survival. Later that day, as I helped clean up the wrapping paper and ribbon that covered every surface of the living room, I found a child's drawing tucked between the couch cushions. It was Emma's work. I recognized her careful attention to detail, depicting their family as stick figures standing in front of their house. There was Mark, tall and angular. Rachel, distinguished by her triangular dress. Emma and James, smaller figures holding hands. Even their dog, Bentley, was represented by a brown circle with 4 legs and a tail. I wasn't in the picture. In Emma's 8-year-old understanding of her family, I simply didn't exist. The discovery that shattered my remaining illusions came in February, during one of those brutal Chicago winters when the wind off Lake Michigan cuts through even the heaviest coats. I had developed a persistent cough that kept me awake at night, and after 2 weeks of hoping it would resolve on its own, I finally made an appointment with Dr. Martinez, my primary care physician. The diagnosis was pneumonia, not severe, but serious enough at my age to require immediate treatment and careful monitoring. Dr. Martinez prescribed antibiotics and strongly recommended that I avoid stress and ensure I was getting adequate rest in a warm environment. When I returned to the house that afternoon, clutching my prescription bag and moving slowly due to fatigue and shortness of breath, I found Rachel in the kitchen preparing dinner for her family. "I have pneumonia," I announced, hoping for concern, care, the kind of maternal attention I had always provided when she was sick. Rachel glanced up from her chopping board, where she was preparing vegetables for what looked like an elaborate roast. That's unfortunate. Did the doctor give you antibiotics? Yes, but he said I need to rest and stay warm. The basement gets pretty cold at night and… Mom, Rachel interrupted, her tone sharp with irritation. I'm trying to get dinner ready for my family. We have guests coming tonight, important clients of Mark's. Can we discuss your health issues later? She returned to her chopping with increased intensity, the knife hitting the cutting board with sharp staccato strikes that punctuated her dismissal. I stood there for another moment, waiting for some softening of her response, some acknowledgement that pneumonia in a 76-year-old woman might warrant more than casual inconvenience. Instead, she sighed dramatically and added, "There are extra blankets in the hall closet if you're cold." I made my way downstairs, each step requiring conscious effort as my lungs struggled with the simple act of breathing. The basement felt like a cave, cold, damp, and impossibly isolated from the warmth and light of the world above. That night, as fever and chills alternated through my body and my cough echoed off the concrete walls, I could hear the dinner party happening overhead. Laughter, conversation, the clink of wine glasses and the satisfied murmur of people enjoying an elegant meal, the sounds of life, of connection, of care being lavished on people who mattered. I spent 4 days in bed, managing my illness alone while the family continued their routines above me. No one checked on me. No one brought me soup or tea or asked if I needed anything from the pharmacy. The closest thing to care I received was Mark's irritated comment about my coughing keeping him awake at night. On the third day, when my fever broke and I finally felt strong enough to climb the stairs, I discovered something that changed everything. Rachel's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, displaying an email she'd forgotten to close. The subject line caught my eye immediately. Mom's financial assets. Consultation. I knew I shouldn't read it. I knew it was wrong to violate her privacy. But something compelled me to look, some instinct that whispered I needed to understand what was being discussed about my life without my knowledge. The email was to their financial advisor, discussing strategies for managing elderly parent assets and exploring options for gaining legal control over accounts to prevent poor financial decisions due to age-related cognitive decline. My hands began to shake as I read phrases like power of attorney and mental competency evaluation and asset protection strategies. They weren't just hoping I would die soon and leave them my money. They were actively planning to take it while I was still alive, building a legal case to declare me incompetent and strip away my financial independence. I printed the email with trembling fingers and took it back to my basement room, where I sat staring at the evidence of their betrayal until the words blurred through my tears. They didn't see me as their mother and grandmother. They saw me as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to wealth they felt entitled to claim. Was I used? The question no longer whispered. It screamed in my mind with undeniable clarity. Yes, I had been used, systematically and completely, by the people I loved most in the world. And now, I had to decide what to do about it. The confrontation came 3 days after I discovered the email. I had spent those 3 days in a strange state of clarity, as if finding that document had lifted a fog I hadn't even realized was clouding my vision. For the first time in years, I could see my situation with perfect, painful accuracy. I made 2 phone calls that morning. The first was to my bank, requesting detailed statements for all my accounts dating back 5 years. The second was to Sarah Chen, a lawyer I'd helped put through college 20 years ago when her family couldn't afford tuition. She was now a partner at a family law firm, and when I explained I needed advice about protecting my assets, her voice became immediately serious. "Mrs. Clark, are you in some kind of trouble?" "I think I might be, Sarah. I think my own daughter is trying to steal from me." When Rachel came home from work that evening, I was waiting in the living room, not hiding in my basement cave, but sitting in the main area of the house like someone who belonged there. I had printed copies of her email, my bank statements, and a list of every financial contribution I'd made to their household over the past 5 years. The numbers were staggering. In total, I had given or loaned them $347,000. Down payment for their house. Private school tuition for the children. Rachel's student loan payoffs that she'd claimed were preventing them from getting a better mortgage rate, emergency car repairs that somehow always coincided with their vacation plans, the new roof, the kitchen renovation, the basement conversion that had turned into my prison. None of it had been loans, despite her language. None of it had been repaid, despite her promises. All of it had been extracted through manipulation disguised as family obligation. Mom? Rachel's voice carried surprise and something else. Annoyance that I wasn't in my designated space. What are you doing up here? Mark emerged from his home office, loosening his tie after another day of selling real estate to wealthy clients who probably treated their housekeepers with more respect than they showed me. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. All of us. Rachel's expression shifted to that professional mask she wore when dealing with difficult clients. Of course. What's on your mind? I placed the printed email on the coffee table between us. This is on my mind. The change in Rachel's demeanor was instantaneous. Color drained from her face, then rushed back in an angry flush. Mark stepped closer, reading over her shoulder, his jaw tightening as he recognized the document. You went through my private emails? Rachel's voice rose to a pitch I remembered from her teenage years, when being caught in wrongdoing triggered immediate attacks on whoever had discovered her transgressions. I went through an email you left open on the kitchen counter, I corrected. An email discussing how to steal my money by having me declared mentally incompetent. That's not... We weren't... Rachel sputtered, her lawyer's composure cracking as she struggled to find a defense for the indefensible. Mark, apparently deciding that offense was the best defense, stepped forward with his chest puffed out like a rooster protecting his territory. Look, Evelyn, you're taking this completely out of context. We're trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From yourself. The words exploded from him with surprising venom. You're 76 years old, living in our basement, contributing nothing to this household except bills and complaints. Do you have any idea what it costs to support you? The extra utilities, the food, the space you're taking up that we could be using for something productive? Each word hit like a physical blow. I had been contributing financially to this household for years. But in Mark's mind, my very existence was a burden that justified whatever measures they took to compensate themselves. Rachel found her voice again, slipping back into her legal training. Mom, we're concerned about your decision-making abilities. You're isolated. You're not thinking clearly. And frankly, some of your behavior lately has been concerning. What behavior? Staying in your room all day, talking to yourself, forgetting conversations we've had. She was building a case in real time, creating a narrative that would support their plans to have me declared incompetent. We think you might be developing dementia. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Dementia. The ultimate weapon in an adult child's arsenal for stripping an elderly parent of their autonomy. The magic word that transformed independence into a privilege that could be revoked by concerned relatives and sympathetic courts. I don't have dementia, Rachel. I have clarity. For the first time in years, I can see exactly what's happening here. What do you think is happening? Mark's tone dripped with condescension. I picked up the bank statements and began reading. March 2019, $25,000 for your down payment. July 2019, $8,000 for Emma's tutoring. December 2019, $15,000 for your vacation to Aspen that was supposedly a business trip. Should I continue? Those were family investments, Rachel said quickly. Everything we've built benefits you too. This house, the children's education. I don't live in this house, Rachel. I live in the basement. I'm not included in family decisions, family photos, or family celebrations. I'm a tenant who pays rent in the form of unlimited financial contributions. The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock's relentless ticking, marking seconds that felt like hours as my words settled over them like an uncomfortable truth they could no longer deny. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the raised voices. At 8 years old, she was old enough to sense tension, but young enough to approach it with curiosity rather than fear. What's wrong? She asked, looking between the adults with wide eyes. The presence of their daughter immediately changed the dynamic. Rachel's expression softened, and Mark stepped back, both of them remembering that their children were witnessing this confrontation. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Rachel said in the gentle tone she reserved for her children, a voice I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Grandma and we are just having a discussion about grown-up things. Emma looked at me with those innocent eyes that still held the possibility of unconditional love. Are you sad, Grandma? The question nearly broke me. When had anyone in this house last asked about my emotional state? When had anyone cared whether I was sad, lonely, hurt, or struggling? A little bit, sweetheart, I managed to say. Why? Before I could answer, Rachel quickly intervened. Emma, go finish your homework. We'll be done talking soon. Emma hesitated, sensing there was more to this conversation than she was being told, but obediently headed back upstairs. The sound of her footsteps on the hardwood floors emphasized how thin the walls were, how every argument and tension in this house affected everyone living in it. Mark waited until he heard Emma's bedroom door close before turning back to me with renewed aggression. Look, this emotional manipulation isn't going to work. We've provided you with housing, food, and care for 2 years. If you're not happy with the arrangement, there are assisted living facilities that specialize in dealing with difficult elderly residents. Difficult elderly residents. The phrase revealed everything about how they saw me, not as Rachel's mother, not as the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, not as a human being deserving of respect and dignity. I was a problem to be managed, a burden to be shifted to professionals trained in handling people like me. I'm not difficult, I said quietly. I'm inconvenient. There's a difference. Rachel sank into the armchair across from me, finally abandoning her aggressive posture. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I'd raised, uncertain and seeking guidance. But when she spoke, her words came from the adult who had learned to see relationships as transactions. Mom, I don't know what you want from us. We've given you a place to live. We include you in our lives. We take care of your needs. What more do you expect? What did I expect? The question revealed the vast chasm between what she thought she was providing and what I actually needed. I expect to be treated like family instead of like a burden. I expect my contributions to be acknowledged instead of taken for granted. I expect to be included in decisions that affect my life instead of having my future planned behind my back. You are family, Rachel insisted, but her tone lacked conviction. Family doesn't research ways to have each other declared mentally incompetent, I replied, touching the printed email. Family doesn't calculate how to gain control of each other's money. Family doesn't treat each other like unwanted house guests in their own lives. Mark stepped forward again, his patience apparently exhausted. Fine. You want to know the truth? Yes, we think you should let us manage your finances. You're old, you're alone, and you're making poor decisions. That money is just sitting there while you live like a pauper in our basement. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, I said, standing up with more strength than I'd felt in months. It's my money. I earned it. I saved it. And I'll decide what to do with it. Will you? Rachel's voice carried a new edge, a hint of the legal threats that lurked beneath her family concerns. Because if we really believe you're not competent to manage your affairs, there are steps we can take. Legal steps. There it was. The ultimate threat. Comply with our wishes or we'll destroy your autonomy completely. Submit to our control or we'll use the legal system to force submission. I looked at my daughter, this accomplished woman I'd raised to be strong and independent, and realized she was willing to use that strength to destroy me if necessary. The love I'd given freely for 42 years had created someone capable of viewing my destruction as a reasonable solution to her problems. I see, I said quietly. Well, then I suppose we'll find out who's really in control here, won't we? I gathered my documents and headed toward the basement stairs, leaving them in the living room to process what had just happened. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispers, frantic planning, the sound of people who had just realized their carefully constructed plans might not be as secure as they'd assumed. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed, the power to make my own choices. Tomorrow I would find out exactly how much power I actually had. The next morning, I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since moving into this basement, I wasn't waiting for permission, approval, or the right moment to act. I was simply going to act. At 6 a.m., while the house above me still slept, I called a taxi. Not an Uber. I'd never learned to use those smartphone apps that everyone assumed elderly people couldn't master, but an old-fashioned cab company that still believed in human voices answering phones. I need to go to First National Bank on Michigan Avenue, I told the dispatcher, and I'll need the driver to wait for me. How long will you need, ma'am? As long as it takes. I dressed in my best outfit, the navy blue dress I'd worn to Rachel's law school graduation, the one that made me feel dignified and purposeful. I applied lipstick, combed my hair carefully, and looked at myself in the small mirror above my dresser. The woman staring back at me looked older than I felt, worn down by years of apologizing for taking up space in the world. But her eyes held something new: determination. The taxi arrived exactly when promised. The driver, a man in his 60s who introduced himself as Miguel, helped me into the front seat with the kind of courteous attention I'd forgotten still existed in the world. "Beautiful morning," he said as we pulled away from the house. "You're up early for banking hours." "I have important business to conduct," I replied. And for the first time in years, those words felt true. The bank wouldn't open until 9 a.m., which gave me time to sit in the coffee shop across the street and prepare for what I was about to do. Miguel offered to wait in the taxi, but I invited him to join me for coffee instead. He seemed surprised by the invitation, but accepted graciously. "My grandmother lived with us when I was young," he told me as we sat by the window, watching the city wake up. "Strongest woman I ever knew. Came here from Mexico with nothing. Worked 3 jobs to put my father through school. Never let anyone tell her what she could or couldn't do. What happened to her? She lived to be 96, died in her own apartment, surrounded by family who respected her until the very end." He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "She used to say that respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you stop accepting substitutes for." His words hit me like a revelation. I had been accepting substitutes for respect for so long that I'd forgotten what the real thing felt like. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into First National Bank and requested to speak with a manager. Within 10 minutes, I was sitting across from Janet Morrison, a woman in her 40s who managed high net worth accounts and understood that elderly clients often faced unique challenges. "Mrs. Clark, how can I help you today?" I placed my printed bank statements on her desk, along with the documentation I'd compiled showing every transfer to Rachel and Mark's accounts over the past 5 years. "I need to make some changes to my accounts. Immediately." Janet reviewed the documents with the trained eye of someone who'd seen financial elder abuse before. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she noted the pattern of large, frequent transfers, all going to the same recipients. "These are substantial amounts, Mrs. Clark, and quite frequent. Are these transfers something you initiated? Some were requested by my daughter for family emergencies that somehow never ended. Others were made under pressure when I was told they were necessary for household expenses or investments that would benefit everyone." "I see." Janet's voice carried professional concern. "And now you'd like to modify your account access?" "I want to remove all external access to my accounts. No automatic transfers, no secondary signatories, no online access for anyone but me. I want new account numbers, new passwords, new everything." "That's certainly possible. It will take a few days to process all the changes, but we can implement temporary holds immediately." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Clark, may I ask if you're facing any kind of pressure or coercion regarding these financial decisions?" The question opened floodgates I hadn't expected. I found myself telling Janet everything. The basement living situation, the email about having me declared incompetent, the years of guilt-induced giving that had been disguised as family support. Janet listened without judgment, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with the expression of controlled anger. "Mrs. Clark, what you're describing is financial elder abuse. It's more common than most people realize, and it's often perpetrated by family members who justify their actions as being in the victim's best interest. What can I do about it? Legally, quite a lot. But first, let's secure your finances. Then we'll discuss your other options." For the next 2 hours, Janet walked me through the process of regaining complete control over my money. New account numbers, new passwords, removal of all automatic transfers, establishment of daily withdrawal limits that would require my physical presence and identification to exceed. Most importantly, she helped me set up a new checking account that Rachel and Mark knew nothing about, one where I could deposit enough money to live independently if I chose to do so. The changes will be effective immediately, Janet explained, as she handed me new debit cards and account information. Any attempts to access your old accounts will be denied, and we'll notify you of any such attempts. As I left the bank, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the power to make choices about my own life. My second stop was Harper & Associates, Sarah Chen's law firm. Sarah met me in the lobby herself, embracing me with the warmth of someone who remembered kindness received decades earlier. "Mrs. Clark, you look wonderful. It's been too long." Sarah's office overlooked Grant Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. She offered me tea and listened intently as I explained my situation, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. "This is textbook financial exploitation," she said when I finished. "The email you found alone is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. But before we discuss legal remedies, let me ask you something. What do you want the outcome to be?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on stopping their behavior that I hadn't considered what I actually wanted for myself. "I want my independence back," I said finally. "I want to live somewhere that feels like home instead of like a punishment. I want to make my own decisions about my money and my life. Those are all achievable goals. The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges against Rachel and Mark, or simply focus on protecting yourself going forward." "I don't want to destroy my daughter's career," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wondered why I was still protecting someone who had shown no concern for destroying my life. "That's your choice to make. But understand that their behavior won't stop just because you've secured your finances. People who are willing to exploit vulnerable family members typically escalate their efforts when their initial plans are thwarted." Sarah was right, and I knew it. But the idea of sending my own daughter to jail felt impossible, even knowing what she'd tried to do to me. "For now, let's focus on protection rather than prosecution," Sarah suggested. "We'll draft legal documents establishing your mental competency, create a comprehensive estate plan that protects your assets, and prepare restraining orders if they become necessary." As I left Sarah's office, clutching a folder full of documents that would protect me from my own family, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of constantly trying to earn love through financial generosity had been lifted from my shoulders. Miguel was waiting for me outside, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee from a street vendor. "How did your business go?" he asked as I approached the taxi. "Better than I hoped," I replied. "Now I need to do something I haven't done in years." "What's that?" "Something just for me." I directed Miguel to Oak Street Beach, where Lake Michigan stretched endlessly toward the horizon. It was a weekday afternoon, so the beach was nearly empty except for a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the unseasonably warm October weather. I sat on a bench facing the water and pulled out my phone. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't checking in with Rachel, wasn't asking permission to be somewhere, wasn't accounting for my time and activities to people who saw them as inconveniences. I was simply existing in a space of my own choosing, watching waves roll against the shore, feeling the sun warm my face. A text message arrived from Rachel. "Where are you? The bank called saying there was unusual activity on your accounts." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Another message followed. "Mom, we need to talk. Come home immediately." I deleted that one too. Then came Mark's voice. "Evelyn, this is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like a child. Get back here so we can discuss this like adults." I turned off my phone. For 3 hours, I sat by the lake and remembered what silence felt like when it wasn't filled with anxiety about what I should be doing for someone else. I watched families walk past. Real families where children ran to their grandparents with joy instead of obligation, where elderly people were included in conversations instead of talked around. I watched a young couple teaching their toddler to throw stones into the water, the child's delighted squeals mixing with the sound of waves. An elderly man fed pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs, speaking to them in what sounded like Italian. A group of teenagers played volleyball with the unconscious confidence of people who knew they belonged wherever they chose to be. I belonged here too, I realized. Not because someone allowed me to be here, but because I was a human being with the right to exist in public spaces, to make choices about how I spent my time, to sit quietly without justifying my presence to anyone. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before moving into that basement: peace. Miguel drove me back to the house as evening approached. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could see figures moving around inside. My daughter's family continuing their routines, probably discussing how to handle their problematic elderly relative who had suddenly developed the audacity to make independent decisions. "You want me to wait?" Miguel asked as we pulled into the driveway. "No," I said, handing him payment for the entire day plus a generous tip. "I think I can handle whatever comes next." As I walked toward the front door, I wasn't the same woman who had left that morning. I was someone who had remembered what it felt like to have power over my own life, who had taken concrete steps to protect myself, who had spent an entire day doing exactly what I wanted to do without apologizing to anyone. The house felt different when I entered. Smaller somehow, less intimidating. The sound of urgent voices came from the kitchen, where Rachel and Mark were clearly waiting for my return. But for the first time in years, I wasn't hurrying to explain myself or apologize for inconveniencing them. I had all the time in the world, and I intended to use it exactly as I saw fit. When I entered the kitchen, Rachel and Mark were sitting at the granite island like generals planning a military campaign. Legal documents spread across the surface, laptops open, phones within easy reach. They looked up as I approached, their expressions a mixture of anger, desperation, and something I'd never seen directed at me before: fear. "Sit down, Mom," Rachel commanded, her voice carrying the authority she used with opposing counsel in court. "We need to have a serious conversation about what you did today." I remained standing, my purse clutched in my hands like a shield. What I did today was conduct my own business with my own money. I don't recall needing anyone's permission for that. Mark's face flushed red, the way it did when a real estate deal fell through or when traffic made him late for important appointments. "Don't play games with us, Evelyn. The bank called us when you tried to make unauthorized changes to your accounts." "The bank called you?" I felt a surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. "And why exactly would the bank call you about my private financial matters?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably, realizing the trap they'd walked into. "Because we're listed as your emergency contacts. We're concerned about your welfare." "Emergency contacts for what, Rachel? I wasn't having an emergency. I was conducting routine banking business as a competent adult." "Competent?" Mark's voice rose to a near shout. "You think it's competent to live like a hermit in our basement while hoarding millions of dollars? You think it's competent to suddenly change all your account information without discussing it with your family? I think it's competent to protect my assets from people who've been systematically stealing from me for years." The word "stealing" hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Rachel's lawyer training kicked in immediately, her voice becoming coldly professional. "That's a very serious accusation, Mom. I hope you have evidence to support such a claim." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder Sarah had given me, placing it on the counter with deliberate precision. "I have bank records showing $347,000 transferred to your accounts over 5 years. I have emails discussing strategies to have me declared mentally incompetent. I have legal documentation of everything you've taken from me." Rachel paled as she recognized some of the documents. "Those transfers were family investments. Everything we've done has been for your benefit." "My benefit?" I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Living in your basement while you enjoy the house I helped buy is for my benefit? Being excluded from family gatherings while paying for them is for my benefit. Being ignored when I'm sick while funding your vacation to Aspen is for my benefit. We've provided you with housing, food, and care," Mark interjected, his voice defensive. "Do you have any idea what it costs to support an elderly person? The insurance alone—" "I'm not on your insurance, Mark. I have Medicare and a supplemental policy I pay for myself. I buy my own food with my own money. I pay you rent through my contributions to this household. You've provided me with a room in your basement, and the privilege of being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own life." Emma appeared at the kitchen entrance, drawn by the raised voices. At 8 years old, she was old enough to sense the tension, but too young to understand its implications. "Why is everyone yelling?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Rachel immediately softened her tone, moving toward her daughter with protective instincts that she'd never shown toward me. "We're just having a discussion, sweetheart. Go upstairs and play." "Are you mad at Grandma?" The question stopped Rachel cold. She looked between Emma's innocent face and my stern expression, clearly struggling with how to explain a situation that couldn't be made to sound reasonable to a child. "We're not mad, honey. We're just working through some grown-up problems." Emma looked at me with those clear, honest eyes that hadn't yet learned to see me as a burden or an inconvenience. "Grandma, are you okay?" It was the first time anyone in this house had asked about my well-being in months. The simple question from my 8-year-old granddaughter carried more genuine concern than I'd received from her parents in years. "I'm going to be okay, Emma. Thank you for asking." Emma nodded seriously, as if she understood more than the adults in the room, then headed back upstairs. The sound of her footsteps emphasized the silence that followed, a silence heavy with implications no one wanted to voice. Rachel was the first to speak, her voice lower now, but no less intense. "Mom, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. This paranoid behavior, these accusations, it's not like you. You're right. It's not like me. The old me would have apologized for inconveniencing you by protecting my own money. The old me would have felt guilty for questioning your motives. The old me would have accepted your explanations and continued funding my own mistreatment." "Your own mistreatment?" Mark's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You live in a $1 million house, eat restaurant-quality food, have access to everything you need. How exactly are you being mistreated? I live in your basement, not your house. I eat whatever I can afford to buy for myself. And what I need, respect, inclusion, dignity, are the only things you've never provided." I moved toward the kitchen island, placing my hands flat on the surface that I'd helped pay for. "But that ends now." Rachel's professional mask slipped, revealing the panic underneath. "What do you mean it ends now?" "I mean I'm done being your ATM. I'm done paying for the privilege of being tolerated. I'm done accepting substitutes for actual love and respect." "So what? You're going to punish us because we're not meeting your emotional needs?" Mark's voice carried the petulant tone of someone who'd been caught doing something wrong and was angry about the consequences. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply choosing to spend my money on things that actually benefit me instead of people who see me as a problem to be managed." "And where exactly do you think you're going to go?" Rachel's voice took on a calculated edge. "You can't live independently anymore, Mom. You need assistance with daily activities, medical supervision, social interaction. We've been providing all of that." "Have you? When's the last time you helped me with a daily activity, Rachel? When's the last time you showed any concern about my medical needs? When's the last time you included me in social interaction that wasn't centered around what you needed from me?" She fell silent, apparently unable to answer any of those questions. I reached into my folder and pulled out a specific document, placing it on the counter where they could both see it. It was a lease agreement for a 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. A sunny unit with large windows and a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. "I've rented my own place," I announced quietly. "I move in next week." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Rachel's composure cracked completely, her voice rising to a pitch I remembered from her childhood tantrums. "You can't do that. You can't just leave. What about Emma and James? What about family dinners and holidays? What about—" She stopped herself before saying what we all knew she meant. "What about the money? What about them, Rachel? I haven't been included in family dinners in months. I spend holidays alone in my room. Emma and James barely know I exist beyond the presents I buy them. What exactly would change if I weren't here?" Mark stepped forward, his demeanor shifting to what I recognized as his sales mode, the carefully calibrated charm he used to convince clients to make decisions that benefited him more than them. "Evelyn, let's be reasonable here. You're making an emotional decision based on a misunderstanding. We can work this out. We can modify the living arrangements, include you more in family activities, address whatever concerns you have. What you mean is, you can make whatever promises necessary to keep access to my bank account." "That's not fair," Rachel said, tears forming in her eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd shown all evening. "We love you, Mom. You're family. If I'm family, why did you research ways to have me declared incompetent? If you love me, why do you only show affection when you need money? If I matter to you, why has it taken the threat of my leaving to generate any interest in including me in your lives? Neither of them had answers for those questions. I gathered my documents and tucked them back into the folder. The moving truck comes Monday morning. I'll be out of your basement and out of your way by noon. Mom, please. Rachel's voice broke on the words. Don't do this. Don't break up our family. I'm not breaking up your family, Rachel. I'm removing myself from a situation where I'm not actually part of the family in any meaningful way. I turned to leave, then paused at the kitchen doorway. One more thing. If you attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent, if you try to access my accounts, if you make any legal moves against me whatsoever, I will pursue criminal charges for elder abuse and financial exploitation. My lawyer has all the documentation needed to support such charges. The threat landed with devastating precision. Rachel's legal career, Mark's real estate license, their standing in the community, all of it could be destroyed by a criminal conviction for elder abuse. You would do that to your own daughter? Rachel whispered. I would do that to protect myself from people who've proven they're willing to destroy me for money, I replied. The fact that one of those people happens to be my daughter is tragic, but it doesn't make their behavior acceptable. I left them sitting in their expensive kitchen, surrounded by the luxury my money had helped provide, facing the reality that their primary source of funding had just walked away. As I descended the basement stairs for what I hoped would be one of the last times, I could hear urgent whispers above me, the sound of people who'd built their lifestyle on someone else's sacrifice, suddenly realizing they'd have to support themselves. For the first time in years, their problems were no longer my responsibility to solve. The freedom was intoxicating. 3 months later, I was sitting on my balcony in Lincoln Park, watching the morning sun filter through the maple trees that line the street below. Steam rose from my coffee cup. Real coffee, made exactly the way I liked it, in my own kitchen. At the time I chose to make it. The apartment was small but perfect. One bedroom with windows on 2 sides, letting in light I'd forgotten existed during my basement years. A kitchen with granite countertops that I'd chosen myself, not inherited from someone else's design decisions. A living room with furniture I'd picked out piece by piece, each item selected because it brought me joy rather than because it impressed visitors I never had. For the first time in years, I was home. The transition hadn't been easy. The first week after leaving Rachel's house, I'd woken up every morning with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, waiting for the phone to ring with demands, threats, or guilt-laden attempts to lure me back. The silence had been almost harder to bear than the constant tension. At least I'd known what to expect from manipulation. But slowly, day by day, the silence had transformed from emptiness into peace. I'd developed new routines that belonged entirely to me. Morning coffee on the balcony, reading books I actually wanted to read instead of hiding in a basement with nothing but my racing thoughts for company. Afternoon walks through Lincoln Park Zoo, where I'd discovered that watching animals live their authentic lives was surprisingly therapeutic. Evening cooking sessions where I prepared meals for one person, myself, without feeling guilty about the expense or apologetic about my preferences. The cooking had been revelatory. For years, I'd either eaten whatever Rachel's family prepared or made simple, guilt-ridden meals in their kitchen, always conscious that I was using their space, their utilities, their time. Now I experimented with recipes I'd always wanted to try, filled my refrigerator with foods I actually enjoyed, and ate at my own table while listening to music or watching the sunset through my west-facing window. Last week, I'd signed up for a pottery class at the local community center. It was something I'd wanted to try for decades but had never pursued, always finding reasons why it wasn't practical or necessary or worth the expense. Now, with clay under my fingernails and mud stains on my clothes, I understood why artists talked about the joy of creation. Each pot, however lopsided or imperfect, was entirely mine, shaped by my hands, fired to my specifications, beautiful because I had made it. The instructor, a woman named Diana in her early 60s, had become something I hadn't experienced in years. A friend, someone who enjoyed my company without needing anything from me, who laughed at my stories and shared her own, who treated me like a person worth knowing rather than a problem to be managed. "You have good hands for this," Diana had told me after my third class, admiring a small bowl I'd created. "Strong and patient. These are hands that know how to nurture things." The comment had made me cry, not from sadness, but from the recognition that someone saw value in skills I'd always taken for granted. My hands had nurtured so many things over the years. Rachel as a child, my marriage to David, my small garden when I'd had a house of my own. I'd forgotten that nurturing was a gift, not just an obligation. I'd also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my years of emotional exile. Margaret Foster, my former neighbor from the house I'd sold to help fund Rachel's life, had been delighted to hear from me. We'd met for lunch at a little cafe in Old Town, and I'd discovered that she'd wondered about my disappearance but had been too polite to intrude. "I called a few times," Margaret confessed, over salad and soup, "but Rachel always said you were busy or resting or couldn't come to the phone. After a while, I figured you didn't want to maintain the friendship." The revelation had broken my heart and confirmed my worst suspicions about how thoroughly my social connections had been managed and controlled. How many other friendships had been quietly sabotaged in the name of protecting me or managing my social interactions? But rather than dwell on what had been lost, I chose to focus on what could be rebuilt. Margaret and I began meeting weekly, sometimes for lunch, sometimes for movies, sometimes just for walks along the lakefront. She introduced me to her book club, a group of women who met monthly to discuss literature and share the kind of honest conversations I'd been starving for without realizing it. The book club had been particularly transformative. These women, ranging in age from their 50s to their 80s, talked openly about their relationships with their adult children, their struggles with aging, their fears and hopes and disappointments. I wasn't the only one who'd experienced difficulties with entitled offspring or family members who saw elderly relatives as burdens rather than blessings. "It's epidemic," said Ruth, a retired teacher whose son had pressured her to sell her house and move into senior housing so he could inherit her money sooner. "This generation was raised to believe they deserve everything they want, when they want it. They see our resources as theirs by right, rather than as something we earned through decades of work and sacrifice." Hearing other women share similar stories had been validating in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't uniquely foolish or weak or victimized. I was part of a generation caught between their own values of family loyalty and children who'd learned to weaponize those values for personal gain. Most surprisingly, I'd begun dating. At 76, the idea had seemed ridiculous when Margaret first suggested it. But when she introduced me to Robert Chen, Miguel the taxi driver's younger brother, recently widowed and looking for companionship rather than romance, I discovered that male friendship could exist without financial complications or hidden agendas. Robert was 78, a retired carpenter who'd built his own furniture and tended a small garden behind his townhouse. He'd lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier and understood the particular loneliness that came from having your primary relationship disappear, leaving you adrift in a world designed for couples and families. We weren't lovers. Neither of us had the energy or inclination for that level of complexity, but we were companions who enjoyed each other's company, who shared meals and conversations and the occasional afternoon at the Art Institute or the Museum of Science and Industry. Robert treated me with a courtesy and respect I'd forgotten could exist between men and women, opening doors not because he thought I was incapable, but because he'd been raised to believe small gestures mattered. "You know what I like about you, Evelyn?" he'd said during our third dinner together, sharing pasta at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. "You don't need anything from me. You're not looking for someone to fix your problems or fund your lifestyle or give you purpose. You're just complete, all by yourself, complete." The word had stunned me with its accuracy. For the first time in decades, I felt complete rather than partial, whole rather than dependent, sufficient rather than lacking. The financial independence Sarah had helped me establish had been crucial to this transformation. Knowing that my money was secure, that no one could access it without my permission, that I could make choices based on my preferences rather than someone else's manipulation, had given me a confidence I'd never experienced even in my younger years. I'd also begun volunteering at a shelter for women leaving abusive situations. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman who'd escaped financial and emotional abuse helping other women navigate similar transitions. My story resonated with women of all ages who'd found themselves isolated from support systems, dependent on people who used that dependence as a weapon. "You give them hope," said Carmen Rodriguez, the shelter director, after I'd been volunteering for 6 weeks. "When they see a 76-year-old woman who rebuilt her life from scratch, it helps them believe they can do it too." The work was emotionally challenging but deeply satisfying. These women needed practical assistance, help with job applications, budgeting, apartment hunting, but they also needed to see examples of people who'd successfully escaped toxic situations. I could provide both, drawing on skills I'd developed over decades of managing tight budgets and recent experience navigating the transition to independent living. Most importantly, I developed a relationship with Emma that existed outside her parents' control. She'd started calling me directly, using a phone her friend's mother had helped her set up after Emma mentioned missing her grandmother. "Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore?" she'd asked during our first conversation. "Because sometimes people need their own space to be happy," I'd explained. "Like how you have your own bedroom instead of sharing with James. Are you happier now?" The question had required careful consideration. "Yes, sweetheart. I am. Good." Mommy seemed sadder, though. Emma's observation had been astute. According to my sparse communications with Rachel, brief, formal exchanges about practical matters, the family was struggling financially without my contributions. They'd had to refinance the house, scale back the children's activities, and make other adjustments that revealed how dependent they'd become on my financial support. But their struggles were no longer my emergency to solve. I'd spent decades prioritizing other people's comfort over my own well-being, and the result had been a slow erosion of my sense of self until I'd nearly disappeared entirely. Now, sitting on my balcony with my morning coffee, planning my day according to my own preferences and priorities, I understood what Miguel's grandmother had meant about not accepting substitutes for respect. Respect wasn't something you could buy by being financially generous or earn by being endlessly accommodating. It was something you commanded by treating yourself with dignity and refusing to tolerate anything less from others. At 76, I was finally learning to respect myself, and for the first time in years, when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone worth respecting looking back. 1 year later, I was standing in my kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner, not for a crowd of ungrateful relatives, but for the family I'd chosen for myself. Margaret was bringing her famous sweet potato casserole. Robert had promised his homemade cranberry sauce. Diana from pottery class was contributing her grandmother's stuffing recipe. Carmen from the shelter was joining us with her teenage daughter, both of them still adjusting to life after leaving an abusive situation, but learning to trust in kindness again. As I basted the turkey, a modest bird that would feed 6 people who actually wanted to be there, I reflected on how different this Thanksgiving felt from the last one I'd spent in Rachel's basement. Then I'd been excluded from the cooking, relegated to setting the table and staying out of the way, while Rachel prepared a feast for people who saw my presence as an obligation to be endured. This year, every person sitting at my table had chosen to be here. Every dish represented love freely given rather than duty grudgingly performed. Every conversation would include me as a valued participant rather than a barely tolerated observer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was hosting a smaller gathering in a smaller space with less expensive food, yet this felt more abundant than any holiday I'd experienced in years. When gratitude is genuine rather than performed, when affection is offered without calculation, when presence is a gift rather than a burden, even simple celebrations become profound. My phone had been quiet all morning. No desperate calls from Rachel begging me to join their family dinner. No guilt-laden messages about the children missing their grandmother. No last-minute attempts to lure me back with promises of inclusion that would evaporate the moment I was useful again. The silence had been difficult to adjust to initially. For decades, holidays had meant weeks of preparation, substantial financial contributions, and careful navigation of family dynamics designed to maximize my usefulness while minimizing my visibility. The absence of those demands had left me feeling oddly unmoored, as if I'd lost my purpose along with my exploitation. But gradually, I'd discovered that my worth wasn't tied to my utility. I didn't need to buy my way into celebrations or earn my place through exhausting service. I could simply exist as myself, and people who valued me would want me there regardless of what I brought to the table. 3 months ago, Rachel had attempted a reconciliation. She'd appeared at my apartment unannounced, carrying flowers from an expensive florist and wearing the contrite expression she'd perfected as a child when caught misbehaving. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything that happened," she'd said, settling into my living room as if her presence was welcome rather than intrusive. "I realize we made some mistakes in how we handled things." Mistakes? As if systematically exploiting my resources and planning to have me declared incompetent were simple errors in judgment rather than calculated betrayals. "What kind of mistakes?" I'd asked, curious to see how she would frame years of financial abuse. "We should have communicated better about our expectations. We should have included you more in family decisions. We should have been clearer about our financial arrangements." Each sentence had been carefully constructed to minimize their culpability, while suggesting that improved communication could resolve fundamental issues of respect and exploitation. It was the same legal maneuvering she used with clients, designed to achieve desired outcomes while avoiding admission of wrongdoing. "And what would you like to see happen going forward?" I'd asked. Rachel's relief had been palpable, as if my willingness to discuss the future meant forgiveness was inevitable. "We'd like you to come home, Mom. The kids miss you. The house feels empty without you. We've set up the guest room upstairs. No more basement living." The guest room. Even in her attempt at reconciliation, I was being offered temporary accommodation rather than permanent belonging, visitor status rather than family membership, and my financial independence. "We think it would be wise to coordinate our resources again. For estate planning purposes, you understand. Making sure everything is properly structured for tax efficiency and inheritance planning." There it was, the real reason for her visit. Their financial situation had apparently become untenable without my contributions, and they needed to re-establish access to my accounts. The improved accommodations and family inclusion were simply more sophisticated forms of the same manipulation they'd always used. "I'm not interested in coordination, Rachel. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own resources and making my own estate planning decisions." Her mask had slipped then, revealing the frustration underneath. "Mom, you're being stubborn about this. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. Help goes both ways, Rachel. What help have you offered me that doesn't involve access to my money?" She'd been unable to answer that question, because the answer would have revealed the transactional nature of her version of family relationships. "I think you should leave," I'd said quietly. "And I think you should understand that any future relationship we have will be based on genuine affection rather than financial arrangements." Rachel had left angry, her flowers forgotten on my coffee table like evidence of a failed negotiation. I'd thrown them away an hour later, not because I disliked flowers, but because these particular blooms carried the weight of manipulation disguised as love. That had been our last conversation. I'd heard through Margaret, who maintained distant friendships with some of Rachel's neighbors, that they'd sold the house and moved to a smaller place in the suburbs. Mark's real estate business had apparently suffered during the economic downturn, and without my financial contributions, they could no longer maintain their previous lifestyle. I felt sadness about their difficulties, but not responsibility. Adults who built their financial plans around exploiting an elderly relative deserved whatever consequences resulted from that strategy's failure. Emma still called occasionally, now 13 and old enough to understand more about the situation. During our last conversation, she'd asked me directly why I didn't visit anymore. "Because your parents and I disagree about how family members should treat each other," I'd explained honestly. "They say you abandoned us." "Me, what do you think, Emma? Have I abandoned you?" "No. You still talk to me. You still remember my birthday. You still care about what happens to me. Those are the things that matter in relationships, sweetheart. Not living in the same house or giving money to people. Caring about each other as people." Emma had been quiet for a moment before saying, "I think I understand." I hoped she did. I hoped she was learning lessons about self-respect and healthy boundaries that would serve her better than the ones her parents were modeling about entitlement and exploitation. As my Thanksgiving guests began arriving, each one carrying dishes and genuine smiles, I realized how much my definition of family had expanded over the past year. Family wasn't limited to people who shared your DNA or your name. Family was made up of people who chose to love you, who respected your autonomy, who valued your happiness as much as their own convenience. Margaret embraced me at the door, her sweet potato casserole still warm from her oven. "You look radiant, Evelyn. Truly." Robert appeared with his cranberry sauce and a small bouquet of flowers from his garden. Not store-bought manipulation, but genuine tokens of affection grown with his own hands. Diana arrived with her stuffing and stories about her latest pottery creations, treating me as a peer and fellow artist rather than someone to be managed or accommodated. Carmen and her daughter Sophia entered last, both of them still learning to trust in stability after years of chaos. Sophia, now 16, had started calling me Abuela Evelyn and asking for advice about college applications and future plans. As we gathered around my dining table, a simple piece I'd chosen myself rather than inherited from someone else's decisions, I looked at these faces illuminated by candlelight and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Chosen, not obligated. Loving, not transactional. Inclusive, not conditional. Over dessert, Carmen raised her glass of wine and proposed a toast. "To Evelyn, who taught us that it's never too late to choose yourself." The glasses clinked together in agreement, and I understood that my journey from victim to survivor to someone who thrived had given others permission to believe in their own capacity for transformation. Later that evening, after my guests had gone home carrying leftover turkey and promises to gather again soon, I sat alone in my living room and wrote in the journal I'd started keeping since moving into my apartment. "Today I am grateful," I wrote, "not just for what I have, but for what I no longer accept. I am grateful for friends who see me as complete rather than deficient, for space that belongs entirely to me, for choices that reflect my values rather than someone else's expectations. I am grateful for the courage to leave a situation that diminished me, even when leaving meant disappointing people I loved. I am grateful for the wisdom to recognize that love without respect is manipulation, and that family without choice is simply shared DNA. Most of all, I am grateful for the discovery that at 77 years old, I am still becoming who I was meant to be. As I prepared for bed in my own room, in my own apartment, wearing pajamas I'd chosen because I liked them rather than because they were practical or wouldn't disturb anyone, I reflected on the question that had haunted me during my darkest days. Was I used? Yes, I had been used. Systematically, deliberately, and without regard for my well-being or dignity. But I had also been transformed. By recognizing the truth, by choosing myself, by refusing to accept substitutes for genuine love and respect, I had become someone stronger and more complete than I'd ever been before. The woman who had cowered in a basement, apologizing for taking up space, was gone. In her place was someone who commanded respect because she respected herself, someone who built relationships based on mutual affection rather than one-sided obligation, someone who understood that being alone was infinitely preferable to being lonely in the presence of people who saw her as a burden. To anyone listening to this story who recognizes themselves in my experience, I want you to understand something fundamental. You deserve better. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve relationships that energize rather than drain you, that celebrate your existence rather than tolerate it. And if you've been accepting less than you deserve, whether from family members who see you as an ATM, friends who only call when they need something, or anyone who treats your kindness as weakness, I have one simple question for you. Have you ever felt like you were giving everything to people who would never give anything back to you? If that question resonated with you, please share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and speaking your truth might give someone else the courage to choose themselves too. And if this story helped you in any way, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is help others realize they're not alone in their struggles, and that it's never too late to choose a different path. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that every person, regardless of age, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And remember, you are never too old to start over, never too late to choose yourself, and never too anything to deserve genuine love.